Hey, it's Lawrence here, bringing you another episode on high intensity business. And in this episode, I interviewed Luke Summers. Luke is the COO of Power Athlete, co-founder and co-host of Power Athlete Radio, and a Power Athlete coach. He's part of a highly successful business, and we dig into what they've achieved when I actually intro him live in the episode, which is coming very soon. Now, Luke has, if I remember correctly, a CrossFit background. And so a lot of the exercises and exercise programming that him and his colleagues might endorse, we may not. And that's completely fine. I think you're used to seeing me interview guests in high intensity training. We tend to focus obviously on evidence-based exercise and high intensity training business. But at the end of the day, my goal is to help you grow your high intensity training business. And in order to do that effectively, it's prudent to take all the best practices and see what we can learn from the wider industry. Even if we don't agree necessarily with their exercise approach, there's still so much we can learn in terms of how they run their businesses and aspects of maybe even the fitness programming or the client experience that we can take into our own businesses that you can use in your business to help you become more successful. And I think we have to be open-minded about that. I think there's a lot of arrogance in our industry where people aren't prepared to listen to people outside of the high-intensity training niche because what do they know? We're the only ones doing it right. And I fully appreciate that because I obviously am a huge fan of high intensity training. I do feel like there's so much crap out there when it comes to different fitness programs that are advocated. I'm not saying that Luke is one of those people, but I'm sure that if we talked about exercise in more detail, that him and I would definitely disagree on a lot in regards to the actual exercise programs we would endorse and how they would actually look in terms of the details. But as I say, keep in mind the Bruce Lee saying when you listen to this, take what is useful, discard what is not useful, and create what is uniquely your own. I just think this is such an important mentality to have when learning and trying to keep an open mind on what you can take from other people in the fitness industry and utilizing your own business. I actually think that there's a lot of businesses in fitness outside of high intensity training that are way more successful. I think that's pretty self-evident, right? Of a lot of the big brands out there like Orange Theory Fitness and CrossFit, and I'm sure there's many others. And I think that we should be looking at what they're doing to see how we can make high intensity training more successful, how we can get more people involved in very safe, effective, and efficient exercise that we're also passionate in trying to promote to more and more people. So that's really the goal here. And I think, again, there's so much we can learn from the industry. In this particular episode, we focus a lot actually on retention. And more specifically, we talk about how people come for the results, but then they actually stay for the experience. We talk about the importance of daily adaptability, really having empathy for your client, understanding where they're at in that moment, and then being able to adapt to that and provide them an experience and a workout. That's really what they're looking for in that moment. And then lastly, we talk about all the at-home training technology that's come to bear, especially during 2020 with all the lockdowns and COVID-19. And how you, the coach, and your trainers need to be able to adapt to that landscape to continue to provide value virtually. So that's it for an intro. I'll get straight to the episode now. Please head on over to highintensitybusiness.com/tactics to get access to free resources to help you grow your business. And please subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform. And without any further ado, please enjoy this fantastic episode with Luke Summers. Lawrence Neal here, and welcome back to highintensitybusiness.com. This is episode 290. Today's guest is Luke Summers. Luke is the COO of Power Athlete, co-founder and co-host of Power Athlete Radio, and a Power Athlete coach. He's been coaching athletes, training clients, and has educated thousands of coaches around the globe since 2007. He's a lifelong multi-sport athlete that found a passion for football in his youth and played up to college, where a neck injury forced him to hang up the pads. After a 6-year stint running pricing and product strategy at a Fortune 500 company, he took the plunge into the gym business to follow his passion. He's formally educated in mathematics and computer science, and a stickler for productivity and scalability. You're a man after my own heart there, Luke. We're definitely going to start talking about that stuff. All right. Luke has helped grow Power Athlete from a 4-coach brick and mortar gym serving roughly 500 clients each year into a multi-million-dollar online business that empowers thousands of athletes and coaches every single month. Now they have 130 plus coaches worldwide and are steadily growing. And I think this part is probably the most important and really resonated with me. When he clocks out, he is pouring his heart and soul into what he cherishes most, his family, his 1-year-old baby girl and his wife, which, yes, I am in a similar position to you and can really appreciate that and the importance of trying to manage it all right, trying to be effective in your business, but then trying to have those boundaries and spend time with the family. It's really challenging to do. But Luke, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you.
I'm excited to be here, Lawrence. Appreciate it.
Of course. So I thought, you did, as I said, in the kind of build up to this, you really did a lot of the work for me in terms of the prep, which I'm always grateful for. And there's some great stuff we can get into. But I thought, I guess, just to give the listeners more context, can you talk about your business, Power Athlete, in a little bit more detail, what you do there? Because I think that's going to give a lot of kind of context what we're going to be talking about here.
Yeah, absolutely. And a little bit in that bio as well. So Power Athlete was born out of a CrossFit gym, essentially, in terms of the business model. And the methodology that we use is a product of our founder, John Welborn, who is a 10-year NFL veteran. So he played in the NFL, started, and had access to some of the most prestigious performance coaches in his career that, civilians, we'll call them, normals like you and I, we wouldn't have access to this level of expertise except through a book. Well, he had that in-person training experience and was able to build and adapt a training style that we've leveraged here at Power Athlete. So it's right now we are specializing in the remote coaching and remote distance learning space. So we found years ago, fortunately, with how everything panned out, fortunately, that folks right in the birth of this social media space were very interested with what programming and how we were coaching at our gym. And this was also a product of us having a partnership with CrossFit headquarters to run a specialty seminar that was called CrossFit Football at the time. And that was our job. Once I got out of the corporate gig and came on to the team here, we would travel around and teach CrossFit gym owners, which I think your listeners would be familiar with. I know it's different principles and methodology, but teach gym owners, okay, so you've built this box, right, with this equipment, and you're applying this type of training, and the attempt is to drive this level of fitness as defined by CrossFit HQ, which is relatively self-serving, but I digress. How can we empower you with this equipment to best prepare a field sport athlete to excel in their sport? Because there is a synergy up into a point where fitness can propel performance. But at some point, there's got to be a level of individuality and specificity to the training, so that you're preparing a rugby player or football player to take 60, 70, 80 big hits a game and cover the distances that they need to cover in a medium speed and the distances they need to cover in the top speed and repeated efforts, right? So it starts to get a little nuance there. That was how we really built our following back in 2008, 2009, up until 2016. And as we realized, hey, these people want to see under the hood, we experimented with this paywall and putting out the finished product. Because at the time we were putting out free programming, but it was kind of like, minimally viable programming. And then there's this finished product that we applied at the gym and with our personal athletes. And we said, all right, we'll pop it up, see if anyone's interested. And then there was a very big interest, and we had bootstrapped this technology and, invested maybe $300 into some plugins and a website, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And we realized there was a demand for it. And that's when we partnered with a company called Train Heroic, who's running now the tech arm of our company. And now we have 11 different training tracks or remote coaching tracks that our subscribers can subscribe to one at a time, that we coach from our HQ and our coaches contribute, and people are training on demand at their home gym or in the facilities that they have access to. And we are constantly delivering that training on a daily basis via this tech. And then, on the other side of this thing is our true passion is to empower coaches. And that's coaches within the paradigm of sports performance, but there's overlap as well with our coach network in terms of adult fitness. So we have a series of educational modules that we administer that are paired with an in-person test where we essentially certify coaches to join our professional development network. We call it Block One Coaches Network. And man, that's the nuts and bolts of the business. And partnered with that, we slang some shirts and things like that, lifestyle add-ons, I guess, for our loyal customers. And we're building out a nutrition coaches network as well to service our remote clients, because as I'm certain you're aware, man, the time you spend exercising or training is like, that's just a piece of it. And the efficacy of that time spent is just compounded and magnified if you can start to build in the healthy lifestyle foundation under that. So we've seen a huge gap in our membership base. We just assumed they knew what they were doing. And so now we're trying to build a service layer within that nutrition space as well.
Cool. Okay. So in terms of the, thank you for that, by the way. And in terms of the coaching side of it, so helping the coaches, coaching the coaches, is it, and that's obviously what probably we're going to be focused on mostly during this. Are you basically certifying them, providing them with education development, and then they go off and do their own thing? Or is there like an ongoing thing there?
It is. So the pipeline is essentially, we have put together, huge amount of bias laid in here. One of the best in class educational experiences online that you can offer. But we educate them in what we would call establishing the base level of strength for an athlete. So there's a lot of assumptions, much like yourself, you kind of build in your niche and you draw your boundaries, because if you start to preach that, the one size fits all, broad brush, magical pill, it's just, that's not within our value set. So we built out this educational course where we think there's the most amount of value in an adult fitness business. We don't want to tell you necessarily how to run your adult fitness, but most adults ultimately have kids, and those children tend to play sports. And adults and parents, like we're probably learning here, Lawrence, are willing to invest 10x more in their kids, in their livelihood, and their future and well-being than they are themselves. So the goal of this course is more technical in nature. It's to build a coaching ethos and build a coaching playbook, so to speak, to take in a young athlete and get them to what we call their base level of strength, which is a level of, and that, strength is kind of a metaphor in this sense. There's the physiological performance trait of like absolute strength, speed, strength, power, replication speed, things like that. So we have a program we ask them to follow, but we also ask them to build a coaching paradigm to prepare to hand this athlete off to those higher level technicians once they get into, let's say, college, or prepare them even for professional, to be a paid athlete in their youth. So that's the majority of that online education. Then as they pass that online education, we invite them, actually, we have an event going on this weekend. It's going on right now. We invite them out to our ranch in Austin, Texas. So people from all over the world will fly in, and then we provide them with a testing experience to evaluate their comprehension in the methodology and the technical components of the Power Athlete methodology, in their social intelligence or their ability to communicate effectively the importance of the nuance of this program to either an athlete, a young child, or someone's parent, or potentially even another coach. So those are typically the three cohorts that our gym owners or coaches are interfacing with. And then we ultimately have a practical session where these individuals also get to coach, and we give them feedback on the method in which they're coaching a movement and teaching a movement, which we delineate, which I think is very important. You teach a movement, then you coach a movement. And those are two very different approaches and experiences for an athlete, especially using free weights and doing, working on things like sprint technique. Like there's nuance there that needs to be covered. So we evaluate their ability to effectively communicate that. And then woven into the weekend as well is like, I call it experience or adventure. right? I think that even as adults and professionals coming into stuff like this, we want to have fun. We want it to be memorable. And we like to do a little bait and switch where like people are coming for a specific outcome and we'll give you that. You're going to get that. That's not a problem. But like there's all of this like, frosting that we layer on top of that birthday cake so that they walk away with a new level of confidence, a cohort of peers that they've had gone through the trials and tribulations that they can rely on. So we build the network, we give them confidence, and then we also give them, I guess, the stamp, assuming they pass, because it is a scored event and about 70% pass rate, so 30% failure rate. Okay. We send them away into the world and say, hey, listen, you do what you want, but you understand the principles that we've tested and applied and have found to be universally true within this paradigm of goal-oriented, performance-based training to prepare an athlete to play sports. Now go. And then after that, they ultimately have access to us should they join our coaches network, which has annual fee and some minimal requirements to join. But then we have this cohort that we are constantly nurturing month after month to address any issues that come with the journey of a coach.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Thank you for the background. That's very interesting. So what I want to do is go through these 3 points that you kindly sent me. And I actually thought the best way to do this would be to read these out as you sent them to me. Sure. And then we can discuss them, right? And I thought the first one, in fact, almost all of them, if not all of them, kind of relate to the importance of they all relate to driving results for clients and ultimately retention and referrals to help you grow your business. And I guess that's kind of probably the likely theme of this episode. And so number one, clients and athletes rely on their coach to serve them with safe and effective training. Luke's observed that many leaders in this industry forget that clients pay for the physical results, but stay for the experience, which is a product of the psychosocial components of the biopsychosocial triad, which confused me. So let's break that down because I'm really interested in this. I think that as you know, I'm passionate about my industry, the high intensity training business industry, and helping my listeners, studio owners, get better at delivering better experiences that will improve their business. So can we just break this down? Can you talk to me about what these psychosocial components are exactly?
Sure. Yeah. So this is, I stand on the shoulder of giants. I'm fortunate enough through our podcast and John's network and the network, the wake we've cut, so to speak, to have access to some really sharp folks. And I pulled this biopsychosocial triad actually from a physio out of Sydney named Ant Lowe. And it had to do with pain. And he's, there's an interesting thing within the framework of sports and performance and injury where the actual biological structure may cause pain if there's damage. But there can be, let's say, back pain, for example. You can get imaging on a back that shows absolutely no structural damage. However, that individual is experiencing back pain, and there's no debate on that. They feel pain. They want a solution. And what often comes into play here is like, imagine your 3-circle Venn diagram, right? Is that there are social components that can affect pain or cause dysfunction, and psychological components that can affect pain and cause some dysfunction, as well as biological. Like obviously, you break your arm, it hurts. Like that, there's no doubt that that's a biological component of pain. So I started to think of this in the paradigm of coaching or an athlete's experience, and you see this, right? Like we used to joke, no matter, and in case, I guess here's a big spoiler alert for your listeners, like our philosophies on training are at the total different ends of the spectrum. And one's not right, one's not wrong. They're appropriate when they're appropriate. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I would say that those, organizing your training, the equipment selection, movement selection, sequencing, whether it's, the tempo to apply within, the model that you all use, or whether or not it's like velocity-based training techniques in the model that we use, like that's the biological component of training. And that stress drives, hopefully a eustress, and will drive the adaptations we're looking for in sports performance or, within fitness. So that's just one piece of it. And there's no perfect program. Like there's no perfect way to do it. And that's what's so crazy in this space is like, for everyone who says, hey, I've had results with this, someone comes in with, here's all the reasons that doesn't work. You know what I mean? So it's not just the biological piece that drives results. So what is it? And then let's get into the social. So social is going to be your family, your relationship between you and your trainer. It's going to be, or coach. It's going to be your relationship between you and your team. So what, as a coach or a facilitator, we have the ability to turn the heat up on that as well. We can drive adaptation in that social component. And we saw this and observed this in that CrossFit model, which is, group training predominantly, 10 to 20 folks per class. There's bigger, there's smaller. It varies everywhere in between. But one thing we noticed is that, people wanted to come and lose weight and look shredded and stuff like that, look good naked. But then they ended up finding a partner, a boyfriend or a girlfriend, right? They ended up, joining in on weekend picnics. It all of a sudden became their social sphere. That's interesting, right? And they started to stay for that. And the training became secondary. And then that psychological piece is exactly, I guess, the other side of the coin on the biological piece. There's stresses in life that affect your psychology and how you may approach your training, how you may approach the social component of your life. And all of these things are working in symphony and can affect one another significantly. And if you can tweak your experience or your product or your training session or your training program in terms of like that, a longitudinal type of view to have strategies to intentionally try to drive adaptation in these three spheres, you're going to get advocates for your program or for your studio or for whatever product you're offering.
Let me just get into that for a second. So, sorry, I'm only getting two spheres there: biological, social. What's the third one? Have I missed that?
Psychological.
Oh, sorry,
so
you mentioned that
psycho,
first. Yeah,
social. Yeah.
Got it.
No worries.
So, I know that's interesting. So, in terms of the social component, can you dig into that a bit more in terms of how trainers, business owners could foster that social sphere of the Venn diagram more effectively? I mean, you mentioned there about CrossFit's a good example in terms of large groups of people and the social aspect of them connecting with one another. But have you seen, are there other tips you can give about how you can enhance that sort of social side of it?
Yeah, I certainly. Something that's coming to mind is a lesson one of my mentors in my previous corporate stint told me is, people will do business with other people that they know, they like, and they trust. So in my opinion, the three pillars of that social component are know, like, trust. So how are you going to get to know this client? How are you going to let them into your life? And I think that, most successful trainers, they have to be charismatic if they're out beating the streets and they're genning up leads, right? So I think this comes naturally. I guess the appeal I would have is now it's time to make it conscious. It's time to make it intentional. So if you were to think of like on a, let's say you got a whiteboard or a big piece of paper, think of drawing 3 swim lanes or 3 like rows. One's, your bio, psycho, and social. So we go into that social aspect. Then you start to map out like your user journey, so to speak, where there's like the lead phase. And then they're like kind of like a qualified lead. They're coming in for a trial. They want to check out the studio, and then they leave. And then they have their first session. And then there's their like, that 2 to 4 week onboarding period where they're starting to familiarize yourself. And then they start to become a little bit autonomous with the training. And you don't have to tell them as much technical stuff to do. Like there is where you start to fill the gap with maybe more of the social component. Well, you've been doing it the whole time. So it's just finding out ways to care and get them to care about you as much as you care about them. So, man, that's newsletters. That could be one-on-ones. That could be having sessions that aren't even training focused. That could be having a session where it's just sit down and get to know them. Asking about their family, caring about them, right? And then in terms of building trust, man, follow through has got to be a huge a huge component of that. So if you say you're going to do something, do what you said you're going to do and do it when you say you're going to do it. And if that slips because we're human, close the loop on that. Don't avoid it. And
it's amazing that that's not just table stakes. That one,
yeah.
Do what you say you're going to do. It's like, it's amazing to me. Like that's something all the way through my career has helped me succeed, because I had a pretty successful sales career ahead of starting my own business. And I just used to baffle me how people failed to do what they said they're going to do. I mean, it's such a straightforward thing, right? And yet it's very rare.
I know.
Sorry to cut you off. I just wanted to highlight that.
You're absolutely right. And it's, I don't think it's out of malicious intent. I think that things just slip. And one thing,
crap organization, right?
Yeah. And like, the CRS syndrome, where it's like, can't remember shit. Like people get overwhelmed, I'll
steal that one. Listen.
Yeah, take it. I just got my buddy Rob Wolf sent it to me, because we like had the same email exchange. I'm like, I think we've had this before. And I searched, and sure enough, the same thread was like 3 times over the past 2 years. But I digress. So I think that, owning up, and that stuff isn't perfect either, but I'm a big fan of having some sort of objective feedback loop as well, whether that's a peer review or whether that's like surveys from your clients, and it should be contextual. So you want to know, like, at the end of the day, the dollars and cents are going to be the ultimate score. Like, hey, I think for most studio owners and trainers is that you probably start off, doing this stuff because you're passionate about it and you do want to help people. But then as you become embedded in it, and, like you recently had a baby, I recently had a baby, you realize like, well, as a parent or as a spouse, I have an obligation to contribute to the needs of my family, which typically are financially and fiduciary, a fiduciary role. So with all that said, I think it's just being mindful of that and mapping that out and identifying if you are slipping in certain areas, and then building strategies to try to build up a level of satisfaction out of your clients on that social piece. And, I don't know what it's like in within maybe like a one-on-one model, how feasible it would be and how valuable it would be, but like coffee talk, just checking in. And especially now more than ever, man, people just want to be heard. Like I think, make a phone call, set up a Zoom call just like this and say, hey, I'm having coffee. Would you like to share coffee with me over Zoom or tea? And just see what they have to say. And at the end of the day, people just like to be heard. So that would be, that's a technique that you can use in terms of building up trust, and if there's any favors or anything that are inbounds, or maybe they stray slightly outside of your responsibility as a trainer, it's on you to determine whether or not you're willing to step into that gray area and try to add more value to the relationship.
Awesome. Luke, I should have said probably at the start, but most of my listeners, like 80-90%, are based in the US. There's a lot that, so I really appreciate your reference to rugby and tea. I feel like you're catering for the British, and obviously I do have listeners worldwide, but I would say the majority are there. So yeah, you're good.
There you go.
But no, that's great. I really appreciate providing a bit of the theory and then the tactics. That's kind of what I wanted from you, is I wanted some tactics in terms of the social, which I think, my listeners can actually take and test. Can we jump back to the psychological for a second? What are
Sure.
Can you kind of give a bit more information on what are the kind of psychological considerations trainers, owners need to have, and how they can actually, practically implement, a process during a client session to really make sure they're tackling that sphere effectively, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. There is, one tool that we use with our remote coaching model is at the start of every session, we have a 5-question readiness survey that is just, it's a Likert scale, 1 to 5, 5 being, like thumbs up and 1 being thumbs down. And we'll say, how's your sleep? How's your mood? Are you sore? How's your energy level? And then now I'm forgetting the fifth one. But
injury, perhaps.
So it's soreness, sleep.
Okay, that's injury related, isn't it?
Yeah, it potentially will come to me, but I don't know that it's necessarily important. But because at the end of the day, it comes down to mood. So within the psychological space, is trying to pick up on someone's mood, and this is where there's a lot of groundwork on the front end. So as we get into our warm up within our space, so our warm up's a daily assessment, as well as like corrective exercises, as well as preparation. So we try to layer in these three components of assessment, correctives, and preparation, preparing the athletes for the demands of that training day. Within, and I'm sure maybe your listeners aren't familiar, but the training sessions typically are like 90 minutes, and they're pretty demanding, 7 to 12 movements, through space, very dynamic in nature, because we're preparing them for sport for the most part. Okay. So we need to make sure that ankles are intact, wrists are intact. There's no, acute type of issues that would be trending outside of where our assessment would typically show us. And we use a selection of movements and isometrics to test this type of stuff. So sorry, going back into it, that there is the conversational piece of that is like, hey, how's your day going? What's going on outside of the gym? And for us, it's youth and college athletes that we're preparing our coaches to talk to. So what are the psychological stresses there? If you look at like in the NCAA football, as we go into bowl and tournament seasons, those are typically in line with finals. So final exams. And so there's a huge psychological stressor for those athletes. And their readiness scores, whether they're Likert or measured with a device called Omega Wave, like their readiness is very low. So the training has to be augmented and modified to take into account this psychological stress, because when the psychological stressors are high, the typical physiological stresses we apply can turn from eustress to distress and start actually working against us and start teetering into that vein of reversibility where the training isn't recoverable. So now your guys are kind of digging themselves and gals are digging themselves into a ditch. Now within the adult fitness space, what are some stressors there? In the States, there's tax season. Within the States, depending on what type of individual your person is, and as you get to know them, from me personally, for example, when I was everything up until like 18 and started paying my own way, Christmas was awesome, right? You get these presents, you get like this epic feast. It's a time for celebration. But then the
glory is.
Oh man. But then like you scale beyond that. So what was Christmas for me? We had finals in college and university, right? You're getting older. You're like, man, another year's already passed. You have to buy presents now, so there's a financial strain.
And you don't get any presents.
Yeah, you don't get any presents anymore. The kids are getting them, and they just love the wrapping paper. They don't even want the doll you got them. And then there's like the costs associated potentially with travel, the time away from work. Like these things start to accumulate. So, but that's me. That's how that became a stress on me, for example. But then I know people who love the holidays, right? And then their psychological stresses are down. They're euphoric almost. So like you can expect two different training sessions from those types of psychographics. That's just an example. Yeah. But how you would screen for that is just kind of daily assessment. But we also get in a loop of familiarity where, and man, I remember doing it as a kid. How was your day today? Fine. No, like that's not communicating. That's just shutting down the conversation. So as a trainer or a coach, you need to build techniques to kind of coax maybe a little more information, meaningful data at this point, subjective information.
How might you do that in that particular example you just gave? So they go, how are you feeling? I'm fine. How would you follow that up if you weren't convinced? Yeah,
it depends also on the social contract you've kind of created, which changes over time with the life cycle of your client, right? Yeah. So you could maybe ask about specifics, or maybe fine in and of itself is uncharacteristic, and that in and of itself is the data point. Fine, huh? Not great. What is everything okay? Everything going on? I'm just really tired. What's going on? Didn't get good sleep? Oh, I have a 9-month-old. You know what I mean? My sleep has turned to crap. Or the other way, they come in and, oh, great. I just got a new job, this, that, and the other thing. So it's going to be kind of subjective and conversational. Now, within our space, in the performance side of things, we're always on that upper threshold of maximal recoverable volume, right? So there's a lot associated in the training paradigm for performance. Mm-hmm. So it's really important on our side to monitor that, because there's such a thin line that you're really, putting these guys through some pretty intense training sessions. So how that might look for us in our space is then adjusting the programming. So let's say, we got some heavy barbell back squats that we were planning on burying our folks with, because that's just kind of the periodization of the program. We might bail on that, and we might do some lunges instead with some dumbbells, which is kind of a lower, still challenging, hard, but it's a lower physiological stress. So that's an example of how we would augment it on our side based off of that feedback.
Yeah, that's great. That's so critical, that assessment. And I think it's a good time actually to touch on this in a bit more detail, especially in my context or in our context within high intensity training. I think, it's so if you can grab that information in the beginning about what's important to them or what's bothering them, and then use that as a filter for everything you say, or a lot of what you say during the session. So like, a good example is like, well, if someone says, I'm really just trying to think here. I'm really just interested in increasing the strength or the tone, for want of a better word, of my arms, of my, I was training someone the other day who said that. Then, when you come on to doing some sort of exercise which really targets the triceps, you can talk about how it's going to be improving that area, that appearance, muscle mass, help with fat loss. I mean, we know fat loss is primarily diet, but you can drip feed that information during a session. Because I think one of the things is, and I'm sure you and I would both agree on this, is strength training as a whole is like a catch-all for so many benefits, right? We know that if you train of high intensity in strength training, you're going to elicit so many adaptations that you will overwhelm your client. If you tell them about all those things, they might only care about 2%, right? Mm-hmm. And so but as a trainer and as someone who's passionate about health and fitness, you feel so, you just want to pour out and you want to tell them about all the reasons why they must do this. And you just have to realize that that's likely to turn someone off, and you really need to just pay attention to them and drip feed what's relevant to them, what they've shown interest in, and what's relevant to that assessment, right? And it's like, if you can do that, you're actually going to have greater retention. You're going to have them more likely to remark to people saying, hey, you know what? This trainer actually really gave a shit about me and really listened to me and really understood that. And that's just something I've noticed in personal training myself, but also in a common theme on my podcast when I talk to owners who are just really successful at building their businesses. It's like they're just so in tune with their clients, So I just want to add that on the tail end there, because I just thought you made a really good point.
Let me ask you this. So if a client were to come in, let's say, and just was feeling like, man, I'm just beat up, I'm tired, you can tell that there's like a psychological deficit from their typical personality. Would there be a modification in, let's say, like movement selection, or potentially a modification in any sort of the programming laid out for that day? Or would it be more scaling, maybe load and intensity?
Yeah, good question. I think in the context of high intensity training, if they came in and they were it depends, right, on the level. Like if they were severely tired and demotivated, or maybe let's say on the extreme end, they were feeling sick. There's an argument to say, just go home. Yeah. Because actually you're just going to, like you were saying, dig a deeper hole. Recovery is so underappreciated in fitness. There's a lot of variables, right? It depends on a lot of things, but that could be a response. Or you could, so this might interest you. So in our field, it's relatively low volume, high intensity anyways, low frequency. And so let's say on the higher end, trainers are doing kind of 10 to 12 exercises, split between compound and single joint. If someone's come in and they're really beat up, you might reduce that to like a big 3 with maybe some single joint, see how they go, kind of play it by ear. I think that's what I would do, and probably what a lot of my colleagues would do. But it would depend on where they are on that like spectrum? Like, how bad are they?
Yeah. And
but yeah,
even
modify the
when we were
program.
when we were training adults, and I'm thinking back in the CrossFit space, and while we were CrossFit gym, I mean, we it was the same format. We would cap classes at 18, and that typically that class was a cohort of like very experienced members, pretty autonomous, and that's how we had a higher, because we liked 1 to 10. So we wanted 1 to 10, but just, man, we needed more spots, right? But so 8 to 6 of those folks were very autonomous and experienced clients, so we could kind of like give them minimal attention, and they were fine with it as well, right? Because we had a high level of customer satisfaction. But there'd be times that we would almost pivot and create a play day if there was a big enough cohort of, let's say, 3-4 clients are just like dog shit. It's like, all right, well, we're going to shift this up a little bit. We had some isometrics and some movement flow for our warm up. We're going to do a little bit of tag, right? And we just do like tag and like incorporate play. And what you realize is, man, a lot of times this is just recess or play day for grown-ups. and it worked, right? And all of a sudden they're laughing, they're getting sweaty, and then you can kind of recalibrate the focus. So I don't know if that might be a viable technique to create a game out of a segment of that early portion of the training session, which may not be appropriated to the desired training response of the day or longitudinal for the client's goals, but it starts to like just disarm whatever that whatever that psychological stress could be, and then it opens up the training response. You know what I mean? So I don't know if that could be a tool, and like it's hard to say specifically what you could do. You play left, right, center, and put $5 on the line, and like kind of have a little or some sort of calisthenics type of challenge. I'm just trying to think out loud of something that's truly applicable and technical that your listeners could take away. But maybe that's a way to disarm that.
I think
if you're picking up on it.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. I think it's funny because I'm thinking about my listeners and the industry that I typically represent. They'd be, some of them would be absolutely shocked at what you just said, and that makes me laugh because it's I get where they're coming from, because there's a real, I think there's a real bias in my niche for results over experience. That's kind of controversial to say, but that's my opinion based on what I've seen and through my journey. And I get that, because we want to deliver the best results, the optimal results we can for the client. But if the experience isn't optimized, or of a certain level, then it's really difficult to get someone to stay interested and to retain that person and ensure that they sustain. Because you can't, as you can't just start doing exercise and stop. It's something that has to become a lifestyle change. But I do think what you said there, whilst that might seem like, that you're never going to have a group of, say, 20 people all doing something together in a HIIT studio setting, and not in our niche. But I do think there is opportunity for some kind of like gamification, some kind of like protocol that's kind of fun. Maybe it is, and this is, some people are going to think it's blasphemy of me saying this, but maybe it's like not to muscular failure, and it's some kind of protocol that's just like, maybe some isometrics thrown in. I can't think of anything on the top of my head, but that just, like you say, it kind of keeps that person engaged, and then maybe they'll revert to an optimal training format further down the line, right, when they're feeling better or whatever. And I don't know, I'm not, it's not like I'm sitting here saying I have the solution for my industry, but I just think we do need to pay more attention to the experience and the social side. Like there's science that came out, some literature that was out, if I recall correctly, that kind of showed that actually older adults, so seniors, were actually more inclined to engage in resistance training if there was more of a social component. Again, like, I'm not sure if I'm getting that exactly right, but if I recall there was some literature around that, and so maybe there's something to this that we can exploit. Maybe not to the same degree as a CrossFit community, but in some way to just improve the business. So
yeah, and I think where I tend to default when it comes to experience is adventure. So that's where you'll see you'll hear some of my suggestions are steeped in that, but that is because it's authentic to me as an individual. Like, adventure is one of my core values. My family, my wife will attest to that. My friends will attest to that. I would think that the experience that you create has to be authentic to you. So I don't have an elegant, I guess, analogy to stray wide from that adventure space. But what is your experience, and what values does that particular client have as well, right? If I have a very transactional individual in my gym and they're here and they're still in this within their journey, they're outcome oriented, then the experience I create has to be outcome oriented, right? Now, if you're following our behavioral change model, you're trying to get them from outcome oriented to process oriented. So as they transition into that space, and if you can map that where they're no longer concerned about the tone of my arms and the muscle mass that they're carrying and maybe their shoulders and chest, and they're more now attuned to getting the training in. They understand the value of the training. They become process oriented. They know the importance of showing up. The biggest friction point in their day is getting to the gym. And then from there, like, it's cake, baby. And then after that, what you're trying to get them into as to become this advocate and this evangelist for your brand is like for this to now be embedded in their lifestyle. That the time spent in the gym, outside of the gym, is to facilitate the activities that take place in the gym. And I think as you get further along that behavioral change model, the adventure piece can kind of be, or that experience piece is more important because that's your retention. If you're creating an experience, and it doesn't have to be adventure, again, it doesn't have to be gamification, but whatever that experience is, that's authentic to you as a studio owner or as a coach, like having intention behind it, and then your clients will align with it, right? They'll almost be groomed through that behavioral change model to anticipate that and stay for that. And the ones who don't, they weren't your people anyways, right? The hardest thing to do, and this is what ended up burning out many of our coaches on the adult fitness, is they're trying to be something else to appease their clients. And in doing that, it imposes this level of fatigue where you're like, I'm going to burn it down today. I'm done, and it shouldn't be that. So I guess it is, thanks for calling me out on that and for making me realize the other side of the coin is like, it doesn't have to be, fun and games per se, but like whatever experience you think can disarm your client, because you're going to know them better than I would. You need to have some intent behind that and some scalability, laterally in terms of experimenting. Maybe they do like this, right? And if it does sound like sacrilege to gamify a warm up or something, to me, this is my personal value is like, there might be something there, so that might be something to scratch at, an itch to scratch at and experiment with, not apply broadly, but experiment and have a closed loop experiment where you have a plan for incorporating it or implementing it into your session. You have a plan for monitoring or getting feedback on whether or not it was a valuable experience for your client. And then from there, a plan to either shut it down or maybe expand the experiment, right? That'd just be my recommendation. And so this comes from mostly how we've modeled our business on our end is I'm leaning heavily into the SaaS space, software as a service. So things like, MailChimp and Gmail and these things, these are kind of like SaaS business models. And how they, when Gmail wants to deploy a new feature, they don't just press play and push it out. They have, they do some sort of A/B testing or split testing on small cohorts, and they are diligently gathering feedback.
Yeah, rifle shots, right?
Yeah. And I think that, man, if you're not adapting, I don't know that you're growing. And I'd gladly take that pushback too. Like I would probably lean back on that, but I don't think there's shame in trying little experiments and maybe, like I said earlier, stepping into that gray area that doesn't feel natural or maybe is outside of scope and be like, well, let's see what happens. I don't know. Like, I guess up front, you'd have to say, am I going to lose a client? Am I going to lose this client on this? And I would hope that like there's a low risk in whatever experiment you're doing, and
yeah, I think there's a few filters, right? Like, okay, we don't want to injure this person. So if this, what we're going to do is like, it could injure them, then we're not going to do it. Like, I think that could be a useful filter, but I agree. It's can be valuable to be a bit more open-minded about trying some of these things.
Sure.
For sure.
But also if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Like that's also a valuable one too. So if you're thriving and your clients are happy, like, hey, I'll back off. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, for sure. So I figured it'd be a good time to move on to the second one here. Sure. And we might spend so much time on the second that we won't get to the third, and that's totally fine. So I'm gonna read this one. So number 2, daily adaptability needs to be a core principle for anyone looking to work with people. What works today may not work tomorrow. This is actually related to what we're kind of just talking about. And what works tomorrow may never work before. This goes far beyond movement selection, volume, and intensity. How can a coach's daily assessment tap into not just the physical readiness of their client? How can a coach assess their client's emotional well-being? Okay, I feel like we've already covered this.
Yeah,
so we did. On to number 3. Yeah,
and I guess the adaptability piece would come into. I guess there's more margin within the methodology and model that we employ. Right. There's more margin for that. Like it wouldn't be uncommon for one of our coaches to just burn down the plan for the day and like let kids play spike ball. You know what I mean? Like if these kids came in and, they all go to the same school, which is pretty common, like you get a team into your studio or your gym and like it was just a rough day at school or something, or like they had a big loss or a big win, like if you're in season, the goal is just to kind of get them to go fast. You can incorporate a game like spike ball and they'll go fast. They'll hit the velocities that you would never hit in training in that level of like low level kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Just leisure play activity. Mm-hmm. So, that's kind of where my head was at on that. And then also similarly, I guess I can imagine that the paradigm of some of the business owners and your listeners is, I would imagine at some point early in a client's journey, before they've, built up the coordination and kind of the body awareness to understand and feel how movements may be stressing them, right? Something might hurt or something might not feel right in weeks 1 through 8. But then all of a sudden, that may be one of the most valuable training stimuli weeks 12 through 14. And you're not going to know unless you're kind of like are respecting and correcting whatever that issue may be, that for 80%, 90% of your other population, this has been a totally effective technique, machine, exercise. But for this individual, they've got some sort of maybe pathology or weakness or imbalance, right? So I think it's like kind of revisiting the things that you like kind of put off in the no-fly zone. Not necessarily as like diving in and going hard, but hey, let's try this again today. Let's see how you're feeling. Oh, no. Okay. Pivot off. Right.
Okay.
And that's kind of where my head's at with that. From what I understand of your listeners and the business model and methodology could be more applicable.
I appreciate that. Awesome. Okay. So number 3 is really interesting. So the world is getting smaller and services are becoming more available. The indoctrinated perceive coaching to be an art. And I agree with that, as do I, Luke. But we are not what we believe we are. We are what our clients believe us to be, which is a service. This industry is being threaded by AI and at-home training technology. It's Luke's belief that human coaches are irreplaceable. Actually, it's our belief then in that case. But they need to adapt to compete with the perceived value of the at-home training movement. Elaborate on that for me, Luke. I like that.
Yeah, man. Peloton, Mirror.
What's Mirror? Which one's that?
So Mirror is a mirror, I guess. And
I've heard it. It rings a bell. Yeah.
Yeah. Embedded in it is a screen, like a heads up display in a screen, and then pops up. And next thing you know, you see some jack dude or some totally fit chick. Like, hey, go grab. And I think there's some like resistance bands and straps associated, like attached to this mirror, and the arms that kind of unfold from it. And they'll say, hey, do your single arm presses. All right, you're doing fantastic. So you kind of get a little bit of that interaction, but I do believe, from what I understand now, at least, those sessions are pre-recorded, right? So it's not like a one-to-one type deal. Yeah, and this stems from where we've certainly found a ton of value for the business, right? And this is like, but it's also beware when the art of coaching and the adventure of engaging with human athletes also, I guess, went to the wayside, is when we decided we're going to try to establish a totally scalable business model with on-demand at-home training. So I think that, where we went was wholesale into remote. I'm tempted to bet that there is a model, there's a model where a studio owner or gym owner can do both. Meaning, already there's kind of minimally effective dose within the HIIT model, right? So it's 2-3 sessions a week, I think we were talking about. Is
correct?
That what it typically shakes out to be? Yeah, within our space where it became a challenge and a little more pertinent is folks are coming 4 or 5 times a week. And that's the value that they're used to. But gym owners are at an interesting point with capacity and the social distancing regulations. So now if you were able to pull through 120 clients a day, that's ultimately down 20%. So how are you realistically going to service people? Are you going to open more hours? Well, there's only so many available training hours a day, right? And the philosophy that I was reaching at there is there's effective training practices that are like minimal equipment or no equipment, where folks can still follow a training protocol from the comfort of their own home if you have the technology to offer them. And I think where the value there becomes is you can do a hybrid approach where maybe someone's coming into your studio 1 or 2 times a week, maybe once every 2 weeks. And you can really reduce that footprint, but you can reappropriate the fees that they pay to your gym, maybe into an equipment leasing program, into the technology that allows them to do this from home remotely, whether that's a live training session over technology like Zoom, or whether you use something like the program that we use, Train Heroic, to schedule on-demand training sessions. So there's still this value that you can provide that you'd also have to supplement with other value items, whether it's newsletter, maybe it's a nutrition mentorship program or challenge, right? So, but I think that you can stack this in and really scale your business. And what this could potentially allow for too, if you model it and really build this out, is, the gym business, I would imagine, it's predominantly referral based. If you get someone great results, they're going to say, hey, come on into the gym. My trainer's amazing. The program's amazing. Look at my abs. It's going to speak for themselves. But you're restricted there by proximity. If you can drive real results from a remote training type of model, that referral base has just gone global.
Yeah.
So if you have an aunt or uncle in Australia and your cousin's in Hawaii and your wife's parents are in New York, but your coach has an epic remote training experience, your referral base has just gone global, because you can ask those people, once you get them into that evangelist or advocate point of being a member, to bring in their family. You know what I mean? And I think that there's some real value to that. I just, it's kind of a bet. It's kind of a bet right now, though, right? Because there's a lot of research in terms of, I'm probably going to butcher this, and I'm also paraphrasing from a guest on our podcast who's more of an expert in relationships. His name's John Howard, and he's actually like a marriage and love counselor. But he had talked about how an individual, when you're like, Lawrence, if you and I were in the same room right now, we can measure neurologically how I'm responding to our conversation, like the bio and psychological metrics. That nervous system has a response to your body language, to your scent, to the noise bouncing off these walls versus out of these. And let's say that I'm going to just give you an arbitrary number. That is like an activation of 10, right? Out of 1 to 10 scale. As we then go to this, we drop to about a 5, right? And then as we then go to just phone or audio, we drop to about a 2.5. And then as we then go to text message, we drop under a 1 in terms of that stimulation, that nervous system stimulation. So there undoubtedly, the in-person experience is irreplaceable. I mean, it is. However,
you got me thinking about like how bad communication gets. Like Twitter would be like a -5, right? Like it's like
exactly.
Sorry to cut you off, but it just makes me think of all the time, all these political arguments that are going on, or arguments in general that go on online. It's like people are often talking past each other, right? They're talking about totally different things, and people don't realize that it's not what they're saying. It's that the communication format is totally ineffective. So it's a total waste of everyone's time.
That's right.
When you're arguing about stuff. So whereas if you and I, it's like even like you and I right now doing this, like we could probably have we've had a very productive conversation so far, but if we were actually in person sitting there, we would even have a better understanding of the nuance of what each other's saying and things like that. So I just wanted to mention that because I just think you're totally on the money with that.
Yeah, there's a pretty funny skit out there. I think the guys who do this skit, it's Key and Peele. I don't know if you've heard of those dudes.
No.
So they have a skit and it's like they're buddies, right, in this skit. And I guess they're supposed to like go out and have some beers and watch a football game or a basketball game or something. And man, I'm going to butcher it. But long story short is like one dude is sending messages from his couch, and then they smash cut to the other dude in his house receiving the messages. And this dude who's receiving it is receiving them like it's an argument, And it's like, oh, now you call. I'm going to take care of you. And he's like, take care of me? No, I'm taking care of you. And then the guy's on the other side is like, oh, sweet, he's taking care of me. You know what I mean? Like,
this sounds like a conversation with me and my fiance.
Oh, dude, totally. And it's so funny because this guy's like reacting and he's ready to show up to this dinner with like, a sickle and an axe to take this guy down. And this other guy's here with like presents and so excited. But it's like, it's exactly that. And, and that's
so funny.
It's got to be on YouTube.
True. It's like my missus will just text me like, I'm fine. And I'm like, and she's just saying, I'm fine. And I'm like, fine. You're like, as if you're being short with me, Yeah, exactly. And, we've just learned to, understand each other way better over text, and we never discuss anything. If we're ever arguing, I get it off the phone immediately. I'm like, nope, that's it. We're not texting. We're going to talk about this. I'm going to get home. We're going to talk about it in person. So much more productive. I can't understand how people have these really long, borne out arguments on WhatsApp or whatever.
I'm with you. And I guess what that's indicative of is if you are going to, as a studio owner, venture into a remote type training or coaching experience, you can't carbon copy your in-person experience because you are already at a deficit in terms of that the athlete's nervous system and how they're interpreting that information. Mm-hmm. So you would think that, I don't know that our consumers or clients or customers are this switched on to know like, oh, well, the research by John Howard cited was, X, Y, and Z. So this perceived value, what is 100 should be $50. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know that you can linearly map those two things and overlay them. But one thing to consider then is like, if you're going to go remote, what are you going to do to offset the physiological deficit that is already in place from being on a screen instead of being in person? Mm-hmm. And this would go into like text message as well. If you understand the deficit there, in person, talking with your wife or your fiance, you might be able to be like, oh, I'm fine, babe. But that's not going to cut it over text message. You know what I mean? As like a very, I guess, topical, since we were talking about it, and maybe rudimentary example is like, you might have to say, how are you? Okay, I'm not going to say I'm fine. Work's going pretty well today. I had a delicious burger for lunch. Nothing too crazy. Excited to see you later. Like that ultimately encapsulates I'm fine, but you've selected just a little bit more. Yeah, but it's also not a paragraph as well, right? That's where it becomes like, it's interesting within Twitter in the 250 character limit, or what is it now? I don't even know what it is now.
I think you're quite right. They increased it, didn't they? It was something like 200 or something like that.
Yeah, I'm not a Twitter guy I'm just no good at that. But the point is, like, this also goes into something you mentioned much earlier. And I don't know if it was before the show, Lawrence, or right as we started, but like being able to get time with your family when you're a busy solopreneur, entrepreneur. Well, it's not just time though, right? It's quality time. So how can you take that fixed period of time and drive the most value? And like a good example of spending time with your family, and I'm not saying you, but maybe we as, in general, would be sitting down to maybe have a meal, but then you take that 5 seconds to maybe check a phone, and that turns into 2 minutes on accident, Well, you've still had time with your family, but it's not what we would call quality time. Or,
Sure.
Just maybe sitting and enjoying a meal and some music or something in like in the living room versus having a conversation with your kiddo once they, are able to talk back, and really start to share thoughts and feelings versus, that transactional type of conversation. I still think that model is like, you philosophically is something that you can replicate to an effective experience and an effective product over tech, whether, I was just going to kind of go on to tech examples, Zoom, Skype, FaceTime, whatever you're going to use.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Did you want to elaborate or?
No.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah. Well, I've got something that might be interesting for you to know then. So since obviously COVID happened, a lot of gym owners, HIIT studio owners, well, obviously gym owners generally, but specifically in my niche, we were forced to transition to virtual personal training. And it's actually been very successful for a lot of studio owners. And that's because, and this is something that actually, a good friend of mine, Luke Carlson, who's been on the podcast multiple times, mentioned to me, is the vast majority of online training is a client watching a trainer demo a program, demo an exercise, and that's okay. But I think what's better than that is a trainer watching the client and, like you say, giving that same level of attention or as close as possible that they would give during a physical personal training session in studio, being, a real stickler on form and giving a great workout using home props, resistance bands, dumbbells, chin-up bar, suspension trainer, whatever they have access to, even at the lower end, no equipment. And you can do that, wall sits, body weight squats, things like that, push-ups. And it's really interesting that if I take Discover Strength, for example, who are, so Luke Carlson's CEO and founder of Discover Strength, they've got 5 or 6 personal training studios in Minnesota, very, very successful business, great team there. And they were able to pivot to virtual training. And within, 2 weeks, they had a 2.3 or something like that, $1 million business, just all virtual. Right.
Yeah.
And it's been so successful, and clients loved it so much in the way they delivered it, and they executed on it very well. Let's not forget that. The clients who are even returning to studio are like, you know what, don't stop doing this because I want to continue doing virtuals when I'm traveling, when I'm staying in my cabin, and obviously DS have, like you've mentioned there, they've also realized, wow, we have access to this much wider market of trainees. It's a great way to grow the business and future-proof, make us more resilient should something ever happen again. And it's not, I use DS as an example because they're kind of often held up as the hallmark in the kind of high-intensity training industry. But there's lots of other of my colleagues who have been successful doing this. I've been doing it myself in my business, helping people remotely. So I think it's proven that it works very well. And like you said, I think people are obviously craving that connection during a time where people have been locked inside. So I don't know if there's much debate over whether or not it will work. I don't think, unless that AI will ramp up to a point where it replicates human interaction so closely so that it can give incredible supervision, because that's what's key here. And we all perform better under supervision. The literature is quite clear on that. Then I think that humans for the most part are irreplaceable. Good human coaches, instructors, even virtually, are irreplaceable. So that's my take on it. I mean, as someone who is being trained by someone virtually, it's incredible. So I don't know if that's... Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
And where I think there's some nuance to carve into on that is the benefit. I think that a lot of the studio owners who are pivoting into maybe that are pivoting into this distance training model, they have a converted audience to ultimately to tap into. They already, that audience knows the value of the intervention that coach provides throughout the training. Where it becomes kind of tricky is on the client acquisition side of things. So if you do have a client who potentially, or a lead on a client who's a Peloton person, they might not see it any different. You know what I mean? So it's understanding the psychographic that you could be trying to tap into to acquire new customers. Now, that is outside of, let's say, referral base. Because I think referral base, you have your advocates, and like, man, I'll tell you what, I like to believe, but who knows the psychology of these marketers that are targeting me at all hours of the day. I typically respond like, I'd say 90% close rate. If someone were to refer me to something, one of my best friends, I'm just going to unquestionably participate. Like, hey, I think this is right for you. I've tried it. I'm like, okay, you said it. Let's go. Because I trust that person. They're very close to me. They know me. I'd rather take a referral. And that's probably how most of my consumer decisions are made, is referral based, instead of like, let me research this product, because I think I know plenty of marketeers, right? And I guess where I'm getting into that is maybe just being aware while still embracing the efforts that you have gone through as a coach or as a trainer, and the method that you employ and the art that you paint, so to speak, on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis within your client base. You're probably the only one who appreciates it that way. And the growth potential outside of that demographic of referrals probably just see you as a guy who counts reps, or a gal who says you can do it. And it's unfortunate. You know what I mean? It's unfortunate because I think that when someone sees they can buy a bike for $49 a month, and then for another $20 a month, follow some videos, and the before and afters associated with that product are life-changing and everything they want to be. Mm-hmm. I think they think it's that simple. You know what I mean? And man, they'll never know what they're missing out on if they don't get a coach, or a trainer, because man, I think that folks are relying on the tech to just kind of take care of it for them, right? Mm-hmm. So I guess my appeal would be not appeal, my plea for anyone getting into this space is like, just acknowledge that and be prepared to have those conversations and truly understand the value you deliver. Don't try to like can up, some of these value propositions that you potentially are going to read in some mastermind class. Like, who are you? And make sure you're connecting with people who need that and want that, whether it's, on the other side of the globe or the other side of town.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting what you say, actually, because I think it is interesting to see. You're right. Like, the vast majority of clients who are participating in this have already experienced in-person personal training with these individuals, with these businesses. And so they are easier to convert to virtual. But yeah, I guess you would hope that they would then be the main generator of referrals.
Yes.
But that new client acquisition, And maybe that's enough. In fact, that probably is enough.
It could
for
be.
most studios. Yeah. But that new client acquisition, that skepticism is rife, I bet. Like to your point, like that is a very good point. And that's why I guess in our industry, we would always offer a free workout initially, right? Because then once they experience it, they see, okay, I understand how this is different. And of course, there's so many more factors here, right? There's, the quality of the trainer, their ability to communicate, the quality of the programming, understanding the client, like giving a great experience. All of that is almost like table stakes here, right? But yeah, it's interesting to see how it's going to pan out. Like, what's going to happen in the future and whether or not this is going to be. I'm yet to find anyone. Perhaps you know someone, Luke, who just solely offers just virtual personal training, and that's all they do, and they've just acquired customers cold and built a business like that. I've not come across anyone yet. Not in the way we're talking about. Like, of course, there's virtual fitness, right? People have been doing that for decades. But in terms of like, the less scalable version of a trainer facing a Zoom camera like us right now and training someone like that. And it sounds crazy, but before COVID, I don't know many people that were doing that, if anyone, really.
Right.
In that particular way.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know?
I would agree with I would agree with you on that. And maybe, man, I'm trying to think in our network if I've heard of anything, that would be, maybe you can find some exceptions of like family and friends, getting together and leveraging that way. But no, I would anticipate that there's a viable business model that way. If you can like build a YouTube channel, get some engagement, do some outbound digital advertising. Like there's probably a model that could spin up that way, but you got to be pretty switched on in terms of that digital advertising space and being able to create killer content, because that
you're right.
I think that model, if any listener is curious about it, it's content driven. Like you got to be able to give away like extremely hot content and build trust. And that is, as I look back and reflect on how we got to where we are today, man, there was like a 7-year period where we were giving away some of the best content in our niche, in our space, and people loved it and it was free, and then when it became time to monetize, they're like, well, if the free stuff is this good, what's the paid stuff like, and I think but that has been a decade journey for us, so in terms of setting expectations, if anyone were to go in that space, we're probably not talking to the right audience. I'm just kind of pontificating, I guess.
That's okay. Yeah.
It's either going to take time or money, those are the two levers. And
you're right. It's funny that whole giving away really good free stuff will actually help generate sales. It's one that I think a lot of people struggle with. I've struggled with that.
Same.
But it's a lot of truth to that. And I think you're right in terms of, I mean, this is actually quite a nice little blueprint for someone who's listening to this who kind of wants to maybe start a virtual training business. Maybe they have a hit business, they want to plug in virtual, or they just want to start virtual period as a standalone thing. Then I think you're right. I think providing really high value content marketing, probably ideally YouTube video content, something like that, where you're demoing workouts, demoing exercises, and then having your kind of sales funnel driving it into a sales page for your virtual training. And I actually think like that could actually be really successful, because what you need, I'm talking about even a modest business here. Perhaps you don't want to scale and hire trainers. You're just training yourself. You have 20, 30 clients, you're good, right? And actually it's a viable way to get there is to, put out really high value content marketing, podcasts, videos, and then drive that into some kind of sales page or something. And this is the thing, right? Like what I've noticed and this is the same with my business model. It's like, because I do coaching behind the podcast, and I have 2 different kind of coaching products. And it's like one of the main, I think, kind of USPs or things you can offer as a solopreneur or small business is access to you, right? And so virtual training is exactly the same thing. So no, I just think you've sown the seed there for perhaps a few listeners who want to explore that as a potential business. So appreciate it.
And I guess the humbling part too, and I guess speaking from personal mistakes, crawl, walk, run, right? So early phase probably shouldn't be perfect, because it could be expensive for a solo individual, unless you do have some funding or some access to cash. If you're going to do some of this content, I mean, you got AirPods and an iPhone. You can put some pretty decent production value together with some lamps, an iPhone, a tripod, and some AirPods. You know what I mean? And that's relatively minimal investment for most folks because these are devices and technology that are already embedded in our everyday life, So then from there, it ramps up to then maybe your multi-camera live production, and you hire the video guy down the street or something. I don't know. I'm just kind of talking hypotheticals. But crawl, walk, run is something that, especially with some of the younger coaches we work with and some of the younger folks that we bring on and contract and employ, the concept is hard to shape. And I remember it being hard to shape for me because I can visualize, I can smell it, I can taste it, I can feel the finished product, right? Mm-hmm. But back it off. What's that minimally viable product? And that is always, I would say, man, I don't know, at least venturing into the unknown, it's always a safe bet to start with minimally viable, but then have goals around that product or that service that are representative of that. You know what I mean? So maybe the goal is like, hey, can I get 10 people to pay me $5, a month for 20 workouts? And if you can achieve that within 90 days, maybe there's something there, minimal investment. And then you can kind of reappropriate that and try to scale and grow. And I would recommend, I guess, not only looking at the, masterminds and paragons in fitness, but the magics and the connections. I think that might be a Steve Jobs thing now that I'm trying to think back, but drawing connections from industries and techniques and thought leaders that are wide and far outside of your niche or your domain. If you can pull connections and learn from them and start to employ practices, I think that it would only benefit you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Appreciate that, Luke. All right. So we're coming towards the end of the episode here.
No.
I know it's a sad moment and my lights are starting to shut off. Luke, what's the best way for my audience to find out more about you and what you're working on?
Sure. I guess, shameless plug, if you have some money to burn, we consider we have some best in class training. It's not going to be in that HIIT style. It's going to be performance-based, barbells, plyometrics, maybe some bodybuilding stuff. But if you go to powerathletehq.com, that's where you can learn a lot about the products we offer. But the easiest thing to do, if you enjoy this media podcast, we offer a podcast as well, Power Athlete Radio. It's the premier podcast in strength and conditioning. That's what we like to say. And we push out a couple episodes a week. And, it is not as X's and O's in terms of training. You know what I mean? Leaning into that last thing I said about pulling outside industry in, we are not wed to coaches. There are certainly coach episodes and technical X's and O's episodes, but we are very much interested in changing the behavior and psychology in our niche. The team training paradigm of these coaches who think they have magical percentages and magical movements. We just want kids to be healthy and thrive. In terms of youth athletes, I look back on my journey, and I can't help but think how transformational my coaches were in my, high school and collegiate experiences with sport. And then I have my colleague Tex, who, we both know, but we haven't mentioned yet, but he had a very transactional and cold experience with coaches. So it's funny because he's the guy who's like, I don't want any kids to experience what I did. And then I'm the guy who's like, I wanted the kids to have what I had, but point being, we go way outside of strength and conditioning to bring on guests on our podcast. So that'd probably be the easiest and best way to start, is check out Power Athlete Radio, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, all the favorite platforms.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And to everyone listening, to find the blog post for this episode and download free PDF resources to grow your high-intensity training business, please go to highintensitybusiness.com, search for episode 290. And until next time, thank you very much for listening.